Okay, I'd like to spend a little time looking at the 70-30 stance. It is the fundamental Taiji stance, so getting it in your head about what you're trying to do in your body is important. So let me just talk about it a little bit. Here's a 70-30 with my left leg forward. I've got most of my weight is being held up by my back leg. Notice that there's some distance between my 2 feet in both the horizontal dimension and the, forward back dimension. It's a little hard to talk about, but I want essentially a diagonal between the 2 legs, the 2 feet, and I'm sitting in the center of it. So when we talk about a 70-30, 70% of the weight is in the front leg, 30% is in the rear leg. That does not mean that I come over here so that I put more weight over my front leg. See how now I'm not in a balanced place. So what I want to do is make sure that I'm sitting in the center of my stance and my feet are like the legs of a chair so that I can sit down and have be supported as well as balanced in all dimensions. So a couple things to look at in terms of the front leg. I want to make sure that my thigh is going straight. Now see, if I stand too wide, this is now too much distance in this direction. And when I sit down, see how now my leg is angled, my thigh? That's an external sign that this is too wide for me. The other thing that often happens is too narrow. If you are too narrow, not enough space between your 2 feet here, you're going to feel like you're a little bit on a tightrope. I want to feel like I can sit down on my legs as if they were a chair. So get that front thigh dropping straight down out of your hip joint. So that's one thing to look at. The next thing is that I need to be able to move easily and comfortably from a 70-30 to a 100% stance in the rear leg. Most of our 100% will happen as a sitting back. There are exceptions, but in general, you need to be able to sit down into your rear leg and float the empty foot 1 centimeter off the ground without having the rest of the body move. So when I step into a posture, if I give it just a little bit more, now I'm too long. And the way I can tell is that when I sit into my back leg, look what I have to do to pick up my foot. See how everything gets caught? That's a sign that I'm stepping too far. I don't want it to be so small that, well, yeah, it's easy to pick up my foot, but I can't actually get out of one and into the other. This is too short for me because I can't really let my back leg go when I'm in my front leg. So I give it a little bit of distance. We talk about stepping heel first, no weight. The way that I check that there's no weight is just by dropping the foot, not by stepping as far as I possibly can and then yanking my whole leg up. You can see that that's creating tension and striving that does not serve my Taiji. So I want to step in just the right place where it's easy to shift in and out of the 70-30. Another thing about the 70-30 is how the hip joints work. There's going to be the front hip joint will be bent. So your hip joints are in here. We're not talking about this part out here. The joint, the moving part of where your leg comes into your pelvis is in close to your center line. So I want to be able to sit down and have this bent. At the same time, this one needs to hang straight. So if I take too short of a stance, they both end up bent. If I take too long of a stance, I can't really get out of one leg and into the other. Start by getting your front leg comfortable. I want my sit bone on that leg to just drop straight down toward the ground. The thigh is straight, the hip joint is bent. The knee does not go beyond my toe. If I stand like this, now you can see that the knee is beyond the toe significantly. That means I'm unstable. I want to make sure that I stand in a way that lets the knee drop, say, to the front of the toes, and then there's a little bit of room for some give for it to change without extending beyond the toes of that foot. This is only true in a 70-30. Because watch, when I sit into my rear leg, now I should be able to sit fully in this leg and bend it as much as I need to. That may take my knee past the toes, but that's the back leg. That's okay. It's the front leg that you want to make sure that you don't go too far forward. One of the ways to make sure you're not going too far forward is to keep the connection through the rear leg. One of the names that other forms use for this stance is a bow stance, like bow and arrow. So think about how a bow works. It's got that nice stretchy give, resilient quality, and that's what you want in your rear leg. So I want it to have the sense of a stretchy bow. If I let the back leg hang down like this, now there's a break in the two parts of my leg, and I'm losing my connection through the heel of that back leg, and I don't have that resilience. It can't really transmit. At the same time, I'm not trying to hold my knee out over this leg. So see, now I'm standing where I'm pulling this leg out of the orientation, and this is making me have more weight in my back leg. It's not where I want to be. It's also not resilient. So somewhere in between, the good old Goldilocks principle. If I look down from my hip joint and follow that line straight down, that comes down to my foot. That's the line that you want. Here, it's a straight line this way. Here, it's a diagonal line coming from the hip joint when I've got my weight in my front leg. It is not, oh, my foot's out there, so I must have to put my knee over here. See how that changed it? That's not the orientation I want. And I can also tell from listening to the bottom of my foot, which now is rolling to the outside. So if my knee hangs in, my foot's going to roll to the inside. If I push my knee out, it'll roll to the outside. I want a good connection through the tripod, the weight-bearing bones on the bottom of your foot, the heel, ball behind the big toe, ball behind the little toe. All three of those points should have good contact. That'll put you right over your bubbling well. That's true in both feet. Especially pay attention in the rear leg. Make sure the outer edge of that heel also has contact. If you're just a little bit too long, you'll have trouble getting that. So if you can't quite get it, shorten your stance just a hair and see if you can't get that good connection through the whole foot. The rear hip joint is flat when I'm in the 70-30, and that's another indication. This one's bent, this one's flat. Also, look at the angle of the two thighs. They're pointing in slightly different directions. My front thigh is pointing straight ahead, but if I point my rear thigh straight ahead also, see where they're parallel? Now I'm losing that resilient bow feeling. So right out of the socket, the back leg has a little bit of rotation. And it's like you're moving away from the rear foot as you come into the front leg. And that will give you this open to the side a little bit, a little diagonal on the rear leg. So as you shift back and forth, you can shift and turn, making the turn happen in the hip joint. And then as I turn toward this leg, I want to keep it still. So I'm rotating over the socket. I'm not taking the whole leg with me. And at the same time, I want the outer side of my hip to stay in line with the leg. That's part of dropping the sit bone on this leg. So when I'm in my back leg, my sit bone is dropped. When I turn away from this leg, the sit bone is still dropped. When I shift into it, the sit bone is still pointing down, and then I can turn over it. If instead all of this gets moved so that when I sit back, it kind of hikes up like this, and then I come forward, and I'm rolling around on the outside of it, the leg will be unstable, and you won't be using the hip joint. You'll instead be rotating the whole pelvis around in a way that will get in the way of your 70-30. So make sure that the leg that you're using keeps the orientation with the knee over the toe. So then when I'm in my back leg, now I want the knee over this toe, and when I turn, I want this leg to be stable. This knee can move when it's the empty one. When I shift into it, now this one is stable. This one could move because it's the essentially empty one. This is the one I'm relying on. If I had to quickly take a step and move a foot, it would be the back one. When I'm in my back leg, if I have to take a step, it would be the front one. If I'm standing using both legs together, kind of pushing up into my pelvis with both legs and engaging both of them, and I have to take a step, well, I have to change before I can take a step. We want to always be able to change in an instant. So you rely on your front leg, the rear leg is hanging. This one is holding me up. This one is releasing downward. We sometimes talk about the octopus tentacle that is reaching to the coral sands below, but is not sticking up and holding me up. That makes it like a stick that's pushing up into me. I don't want my back leg pushing up into me. I want to let it release into the ground. That's where the weight comes from in the back leg, is that you're releasing it, but this is the one that you're relying on always. So that's some stuff that you can think about as you work on your 70-30 posture.